Welcome back to the Sasha Davis podcast. Today I'm speaking with John Fitch and Max Frenzel, the co-authors of the new book, Time Off. So in this episode, we discuss the importance of taking time off for leisure and constructive rest, and then how doing these things regularly boosts our productivity and creativity. So Max Frenzel, who's in Tokyo, and John Fitch, who's in Austin, Texas, have both spent time working in software startups where many are worshiping the mantras that are so pervasive in our current working culture. So Max got his PhD in quantum physics and has been an AI researcher, and John is an entrepreneur and a business coach. After reaching breaking points in their careers, business coach John Fitch and AI researcher Max Frenzel both learned that the critical importance of taking time off. Now, these former workaholics here are helping you revolutionize the way to get things done. You can check out their new book, Time Off, a practical guide to building your rest ethic and finding success without the stress. So this book reveals how history's greatest minds, as well as some of the most successful leaders, thinkers, and creatives of today, found success by practicing a more balanced approach to work and life. Embracing their insight on how constant hustle can be your worst enemy, you will realize that time off means much more than just taking a quick break. By learning how to slow down, you will discover a more fulfilled and versatile version of yourself and unlock your true potential. Follow them on social media. I will put all of the links in the bio. You guys are really going to enjoy this conversation. Plus, it's nice to have a group of guys on here to really show that this is not something that just women need. This is something that every person needs. And I think that you guys will find a lot of great, amazing, insightful nuggets in this podcast. So here we go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have a couple of guys on the podcast. So there's only been a handful of men who have been on the podcast, and these guys talk about boundaries and what they had called work ethic and just taking time for yourself, how to manage your time, things like this. So I'm really excited to dive into this a little bit deeper and ask questions, even from the male perspective or just like a human in general, right? So John and Max, researchers, coaches, business coaches, I will let them go ahead and just take the floor. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll have let's have John start first, and then Max, you can chime in. I know it's kind of weird with like this whole Zoom thing and three people, and then we can kind of get into the dynamic of how you guys met and how you know each other, how you're working together now.
Awesome. Well, before we kicked off this podcast episode in our, I don't know what you would call that, a Zoom green room where we're just hanging
basically.
out.
Waiting room.
Yeah, waiting room. We were sitting there and talking, and Sasha and I have a mutual connection of farm life, and I like that. And instead of just giving the normal spiel of the book Time Off and what it's about, I think if anyone listening has ever been on a farm or in the country, you know, there's a slower pace, more exhale than there is inhale. And our book, Time Off, is about the oscillation, the intentional oscillation between a work ethic and what we call a rest ethic. And I find that when you're out in the country, nature kind of forces you to remember that. And so I grew up on a farm where I was always around people that would slow down. Like, yeah, sure, we worked hard. And Sasha, you'll know if you work on a farm, there's no lack of labor.
There is absolutely no lack of labor. There's always something to do.
But for every phase of labor, there was a phase of putting your feet up, enjoying people, taking time to slow cook a meal, share that with community, invest in your hobbies. And I had lost touch with that as I became a technology entrepreneur. And in the book, we go into the details of this, but I became a full-on workaholic, and now I consider myself a recovering workaholic. But yeah, I lost sight of the importance of time off, and we wrote a book to go really deep into showing people that time off is not just vacation. It's everything from a micro habit of making sure to hold space for reflection, but then also it could be on the other side of the spectrum where you do take a sabbatical, where you really rethink or reshift your career, where you unlearn, old patterns and redefine yourself. In time off, I like how you said boundaries. It's all about boundaries, just like you set boundaries with how you work. We're all about
Mhm.
setting boundaries for how you rest. But that's kind of my story of going from country, enjoying the slow, to then going to the city and getting completely swept up in busyness. And then now I've been able to step back and hoping to do the same for others.
I love that. And how about you, Max?
Yeah, I didn't grow up on a farm, even though I did grow up in the middle of nowhere in Germany. I did help my grandma a lot in the garden and doing stuff. But I think my realization or my how I got to experience this rest ethic in the first place was actually while I was doing my PhD. So I did a PhD in quantum physics at Imperial College in London, and I was just incredibly lucky with the supervisors I was working with. They gave me really all the freedom I wanted. Essentially, it was a 3 year deadline I had and nothing in between. I mean, they did help me if I needed help or if I needed more structure. But otherwise, I could really do whatever I wanted for 3 years. I could travel without telling anyone. I could just disappear. And that's really when I experienced this more exhale than inhale. And there were really periods where I didn't work for 2 weeks because it just didn't feel right in a way. But then when I came back, I realized this time was not wasted at all because I was so full of ideas and energy and so many great breakthroughs just poured out of me. So I originally really experienced this, like the power of time off, what it can do for you. But then after academia, I went into startups and I became an AI researcher. And the first startup I joined, I became more and more busy over time. And at the same time, less and less productive. And one day I was traveling, so I'm based in Japan. I was traveling here through the mountains and just getting a bit of distance from everything. And it really hit me one day that I realized I've never in my life been more busy and at the same time less productive and creative. And that's what
Mhm.
got me starting, well, thinking back to my PhD days and I realized, hey, what went wrong? What's different now? And yeah, that's how I started writing about this topic of time off and creativity, just more as a process for actually myself finding out what was wrong. But I got digging deeper into company culture and those sort of things. And I eventually quit that particular company because I realized it's not fixable without destroying myself in the process.
Mhm.
Um, and I got more into AI for creativity, which is actually a topic we touch on in the book as well, because I think a lot of people are worried about the impact of AI.
I would
And
agree with
sure,
that.
it'll definitely have a big impact on the job landscape. But that's because I think so many people are focused on busy work. We pride ourselves on the busy work we do and how many hours we put in, but no one's going to out busy the machines. But the great thing is, they will actually take a lot of the tedious work away from us. But what's left for us is the really human parts, the creative parts, the empathetic parts. And I think those were really going to be the skills that are going to be crucial: creativity, empathy, but also the skills that we're really uniquely made to do as humans and made to, what we already have them. We just need to actually practice them. And it takes a lot of time off to practice these things. You're not empathetic if you lacking sleep, if you're stressed out, if you're burned out. So I think we'll definitely have to reconsider our approach to work. But if we do that, then we can really make a lot out of the future where we can work together with AI. So that's kind of how I came to this. And I guess the story how we started really writing this is quite interesting as well, because we've been working on this for a year and a half or so, but John and I have actually never met in person. This whole thing was done online.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's quite unique. I mean, John had a podcast on the topic for now, I don't know, 2 years already, John?
Yeah, correct. After my mini sabbatical, where I was like, wow, time off, I lost sight of the importance of this.
Mhm.
I was like, am I an anomaly, or do other people have this epiphany and lead their companies with time off as an essential component? And so I started a podcast and actually had Max on as a guest, and I'll pass the mic back to you, Max.
Yeah, so really, John just asked me if hey, do you want to be on the podcast? Because he saw some of my articles that were talking about very, very similar things to the stuff he was exploring on the podcast. And we just became friends afterwards. And one day I found an email from John in my inbox saying, hey, do you want to write a book together? And that's kind of how the whole thing started about a year and a half ago.
This is incredible. I too left my corporate job due to the, 10, 12, 14-hour days, and it was just full of busy work. You're constantly putting out fires, and you're right, you can't be empathetic, you cannot be creative when you are in what I call the survival mode, which is you're functioning enough to get by. There's no room left there's no energy left for the creativity side of it, the human part of it. And I feel like our culture and our society very much prides people on working like machines, even though our bodies are not designed to be a machine, which you guys talk about time off. You have to have an equal, well, maybe not equal, you have to have these rest periods to rejuvenate, re-energize, and even create what your next step is. And creating, I think, is human nature and gives us energy. So okay, so then you guys meet and have this idea for a book, or how does that?
Yeah, it started as after we were like, yeah, totally, let's do this. What's really beautiful too, by the way, if anyone's listening, if you're US based, I highly recommend getting you a co-author in Asia, because because of time zones. Like, I'll be doing my solo deep work, and then Max wakes up in the morning to find progress,
and it feels like Christmas every morning seeing the new progress from John.
Yeah,
that's genius. I love that.
Yeah, and so we were just we had an idea of a table of contents initially, and then went back and forth on what different approaches would be. And then Max and I were kind of not arguing, but we were going back and forth saying, would this be better? Would this be better? Whereas Max and I both have experience in software. And when you design software, you want to get the early prototype in the user's hands as soon as possible. And they'll tell you what's worth a damn and what's not. And so we whipped up together a prototype, which was basically a table of contents, a few profiles of case studies of successful businesses and individuals who validated our point. We shared that with dozens of people, and they told us what was awesome and what felt like a distraction. And we did a few versions of that, and it was really nice because it got us out of our own head, and we really listened to readers who came from all different industries, different age groups, and they humbled us with their feedback, and that set the roadmap for how we ultimately, at a high level concept of the book. And I'll let Max talk about, once we had the concept in place, then the real work began. And maybe Max, you want to talk about how we actually executed on the book?
Sure. I mean, maybe to give people a bit of an idea of how the book actually looks. So it's split into various different deep dives on different aspects of time off. So we have a chapter on sleep, a chapter on exercise, creativity, solitude, all these different aspects. And they really go into the science, but also stories that back it up and all the facts. But in between those are profiles of different people, historic as well as present, who found success with that particular form of time off. It's really their story. And each of those finishes with a very practical advice. Hey, reader, now practice this person's form of time off and find your own success through that. And what we like about it is that there's so many different, really practical, clear tips of what you can do, but we're sure not everything works for everyone. So this book is really a bit of a pick your own favorites, mix and match, try and see what works for you, and really keep the stuff that sticks with you, so everyone can find their own approach to it. And I think that's what's really important, actually. There is no one size fits all approach to time off. And even work, if you approach it right, can be time off. And some people find their time off in solitude, others find it with friends. And even for one person, this might change over time depending on their mood. So we really talk about all these different aspects. But it's really these deep dives with the profiles. And John just mentioned, I mean, we had this very, very early prototype, and the early prototype was really just a bunch of profiles. We actually wanted to split it into, okay, let's have, I don't know, say 20 historic profiles followed by 20 modern profiles. And that was the whole idea for the book. But we gave that to test readers, and they really came up with the idea, hey, we kind of want to have some more background. So we want these deep dives into specific topics. And really, they helped us shape the book into what it is today. And it's so much more than what we initially set out to create. And also, really, really proud of having an absolutely beautiful book. And that's thanks to the amazing illustrator we got on board very early on. And it's again kind of a funny story, actually, how we found her. Um, Basically, John and I both posted on Instagram a story saying, hey, we're looking for an illustrator for this book project we're working on. Does anyone have someone they could recommend? And this random person that I didn't know personally reached out to me saying, hey, there is this amazing illustrator I've been following for a while called Maria Suzuki. She's based in Tokyo. Check out her stuff. And I didn't know Maria before, but after we connected, it turned out we actually had a lot of mutual friends.
Mhm.
And she's just a wonderful illustrator, and the style fits perfectly to the book. It's really light, beautiful pencil sketches. And yeah, that was another really, really amazing addition to the team. And I'd say actually her style also informed a lot how we wrote the book eventually. And it just turned into this really beautiful piece. I mean, it's a bit weird saying that myself, but I really do think it's turned out beautiful.
Yeah,
Oh, I love that.
and then Sasha, the one thing I'll add to that is just signals for me on the future of work. And at the end of the book, we have an entire section on the future of work, but actually getting to live some of that ourselves was incredible. Maria and Susan, other people that really helped Max and I make this book awesome.
Yeah.
We came to them with just a huge piece of marble. They actually did help us carve
Just
it. So shout
for a
out.
bit of context there, Anne and Susan are editors.
Yeah. Thank
And
you, Max.
yeah, they did absolutely amazing work. Like for both of us, this is the first real book we're doing. And at least for me, I had no idea before going into this how much of an influence an editor has on the book itself. And sure, John and I and Maria are the people whose names are on the cover, but especially Anne, our editor, she's had such a huge impact on the final book. As John said, we kind of came to her with this really clunky, kind of ugly, upside down piece of marble, and she really told us how to chip away and find the beautiful stuff that was hidden underneath.
Yeah, and what I wanted to encapsulate by bringing up our small team behind the book, this would actually be a reflection moment for anyone listening. So again, I've never met anyone on the book team in person, so that's kind of amazing. This is the most proud product I've ever been a part of, and I really think it's because, to your points earlier, Sasha, not one moment in this project over the last year and a half have I felt like I was in survival mode. All of us had this calm nature to us that allowed all of us, I believe, to feel safe, to feel like we were free to design. We weren't being forced into this busyness for no reason. Sure, there are rhythms and waves like the last 2 or 3 weeks wrapping up the book. Sure, I would call it very active, but it wasn't stressful. It wasn't that like we're gonna grind it out and just figure it out. It was calm the entire time. And so I ask listeners to reflect, like, when was the last time you were a part of a project that was calm? And what was the product of that calmer environment, that calmer culture? Because I know this has been the calmest one I've been a part of, and the output of it is the thing I'm the most proud of. So that's an interesting thing, I think, as a reflection point.
I totally agree with you, John. And I think also looking at it from the other perspective, like taking the flip side of this calm, like Sasha, we were talking earlier about kind of bad work environments and crazy working conditions, crazy working hours.
Mhm.
I think so many leaders should really take note of this, because I'm sure we all know a terrible leader who's very reactive, bad-tempered, gets angry
Putting
very
out
easily.
fires. Yep.
Exactly, totally. And those people so often are exactly the same people who pride themselves in their busyness and how little sleep they need
Mm-hmm.
and all that. And I think men are particularly good, in air quotes, at that. Um, so really, taking time off and doing things in a calm way is really something that leaders should consider for themselves to be better leaders, and also for their teams to be more creative and more productive.
Absolutely. And I feel that any project or anything that you do, there's an intention and an energy behind it. And if you come into this book with the intention of, we're going to hustle, we're going to bust this thing out, and things become chaotic, and then that energy rubs off, whether you're in their physical presence or not. I know you said that you didn't meet anybody on this team, but that doesn't mean that that energy doesn't
Mm,
transfer or affect the entire team itself. And so then you have chaotic work environment, which creates stress on other people. And then next thing you know, you getting caught into this busy work because you feel stressed and overwhelmed and you're not really sure what to do. So you busy yourself with work to kind of shut off the mind. And then you fall into this trap of, of just, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is, but you know what I mean? It's the busy work, and then you start to disconnect from what you truly need as an individual. So going back to the whole concept of time off, I think the more time off that you can take, or the more time off, or the more you can step away and say, hey, what is my intention? How am I going to come at this? And if you aren't coming at a place of calm energy, then what does your mind, body, soul need in order to achieve that?
yeah, I think you mentioned a really good word here, intentions. I think a lot of time off is really about just being intentional with your time. As I said, like even work itself can be a form of
Mm-hmm.
time off. If you're really just taking time off from distractions, or maybe people invite you out for a few drinks, but you actually really want to work on that one project you really care about, then that's totally a form of time off as well, because you're intentional with what you invest your time on, time in. And it really comes back to this idea we talk a lot about in the book called noble leisure. It actually goes back to Aristotle. And he really defined, well, he said kind of rest is not leisure to him, because rest always asks the question, rest for what? You rest to do more work. And in the same way, to him, work was really something you did for the sake of doing more leisure. But leisure in the
Mm-hmm.
end was defined in its own way. And it was really defined because it gives you meaning in your life. And anything that really fills your life with meaning, that's true leisure. That can be spending time with your family, spending time with your kids, it can be cooking, or it can be a project you really care about. But if you really approach it with that intention, then it's leisure and time off.
Mm-hmm. And it's just like
Mm.
physical recovery. If you exercise too much, you can hurt yourself, burn yourself out, and that rest and recovery is crucial for you to get up and go at it the next day. And I think people can relate to the physical self more than they can relate to the higher self. And maybe that's just a generalization, but if I can put things in a physical analogy, people are like, oh yeah, you do have to rest your body in order to avoid burnout. And it's the same thing with your mind and your soul.
Sasha, I'm curious, what if you were to paint a picture for Max and I, now that you've understood a bit of our point of view, what's your most meaningful time off at, consistently?
Consistently, I have lots of them. What I do is I do a lot of social media, so I find that can be all consuming. So in order for me to have time off from that, I actually set the boundaries of like turning my phone on airplane mode and having app limits on there, and just leaving it somewhere else and going outside. I really love, now that the weather's starting to turn, I love going outside and just riding my horse, or spending time in the garden, or just walking barefoot through the grass. I have lots of dogs, so maybe that's not the smartest thing for me to do, but I enjoy it. I also
Nice,
have
nice.
I also have chickens, and just like anything that's nature driven helps me, it rejuvenates me. I used to joke around and say that like I'm a lizard and like I soak up energy from like the sun and just like being outside and things like that. So now like with the warmer weather too, just being out in the sun, it just lights my soul, and then I can go back and work on something else. But like when
Mm,
you guys talk about time off, like the thing that comes into my head, because you're like, oh, it can be in this area, it can be in this area, and it can be in this area. I think of, I'm a very like visual learner. And so I have to like put pictures in my head, and I'm thinking of like, okay, here's my house, my house is my brain. And if I'm not going to be in that area, I'm going to shut the lights off. Doesn't mean I can't come back there later and turn the lights on and work in that room. But for right now, I'm just going to shut the lights off and I'm going to leave because my focus is over here, and I'm going to be intentional with my time right here, right now. And then when that time's off, I'm going to shut the light off and I'm going to go over here and work on something else, kind of thing. I know that may be like weird, but as you say time off, that's how I'm like, okay, that makes sense. We're going to just shut this off over here. Or if it's time to sleep, well, I'm going to go in that room then, and everything else is going to get turned off.
I think that's a really wonderful analogy, actually. And it reminds me a little bit of one thing we touch on in the book in a few places. There's this idea, Tim Harford had this concept of slow motion multitasking. Like a lot of us are doing so many things at the same time, but we're not actually getting anything done. And your idea of kind of shutting off the light in a room you're currently not using is a little bit reminding me of the slow motion multitasking. You're not doing several things at the same time, but that room is still there when you switch the light off, right? You go back to
Mm-hmm.
it after a couple of hours and keep doing what you're doing, but you're not running between rooms constantly, like keeping the lights on everywhere and that kind of thing. So I really like the analogy you brought up of the house and switching off the lights.
it's wonderful. And again, when I think about people that, and I'm guilty of it, and that's why you have a rest ethic is, I'm going to run with your analogy, the ability to know, hey, I'm not just going to have the electricity running at all times in all
Yeah.
rooms of my mindfulness house. And I'm guilty of it. I'm sure every listener has had a moment where they're guilty of that. And I can guarantee you, when all those lights are on, when the electricity is running all the way, is when you feel the most anxious, exhausted. And that's not going to help you produce good work. That
Mm.
is trying to mimic a machine. And
Mm-hmm.
sure, there's parts of us that is an amazing machine, but like in the hard analogy of a machine, of software, of computers, of AI, they can do that. That's like what they were made to do, and they will kick our ass every time
Yeah.
at things like that. But what they can't kick our ass in is what you said earlier, Sasha, of taking off your shoes, walking on the earth, tapping into your intuition,
Mm-hmm.
tending the garden, tending to the dogs, giving them love, feeling love back, and then all of a sudden, 35 minutes into that pasture walk, boom, unbelievable idea presents itself to you.
Absolutely. I think when
And
you
and
can
that's human
connect,
work.
yes, absolutely. And that's what separates us from the machines is the ability to think, act, and feel about what it is, the creativity, the emotional intelligence to be able to feel love and get these downloads from, however you want to call it, universe, God, divine, and then take action on that next step.
Mm. Totally. I mean, with creativity, it's really what creativity is really connecting distant dots, right? Like AI is very, very good at doing very narrow and specific things very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very bad at connecting these distant dots. And that's really where the big aha moments and breakthrough ideas come from. But I think actually talking about empathy and sort of human to human interaction, it's very similar in a way because yeah, sure. AI can now very accurately detect if someone has a smiling face or a sad face, but just labeling an emotion is so narrow. I mean, to understand another human, there's so much context you need. Even understanding your own emotions is pretty difficult, but really understanding someone else and kind of how that all fits in. I mean, someone can be smiling and completely miserable at the same time, and AI won't figure that out anytime soon. But as a human, you just have something, well, some kind of feeling. It's hard to describe. Probably that's why it's so difficult for AI. But there's just you're bringing all these distant dots and these distant experiences together in this kind of work.
I think
Yeah,
humans are, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I was sitting here thinking about, like, I listened to a few episodes of your podcast, and I was like, oh, I'm going to start sending some of these to my mom, because she's kind of a late adopter of all technology, but now she's all about podcasts. She's like, oh my God, it's like radio on my iPhone. And I'm like, yeah, it's cool. Check
Oh,
it out.
shit.
And so what's really awesome is, I think about, like, my mom is someone who, she's very proud. This is my first book coming out. And, but I think about my mom and, her work ethic and ability to show up and lead in our family is, I forever bow down in humility to that. And then one thing we've been talking about, which I think may be relevant for your audience, because I think this is consistent with women, and that's
Yeah, there's a lot of women and their husbands that usually listen. So.
Great. Yeah. And so, boundaries is one thing. And I think, yes, set boundaries. And I think especially in a professional context, because again, a manager or a leader is not going to know unless you set that boundary. But I find, like, in the household, and I'm speaking, mainly just with this relationship with my mom and our family, that it's okay. It's not only okay, like, you deserve to communicate when you're needing time off, whether it's after a long week or it's just things kept, falling out of place that day, like shifting one's feeling of guilt. Like in the opening of the book, we really zoom out and show you humanity's history of our relationship between work and leisure. And you realize a lot of these dogmas that feed our guilt, that we have a guilt. Again, if you're trying to be a machine, yeah, of course you're going to feel guilty of shutting off, because the machine's just meant to go. And so not feeling guilty when you need time off, and turning that into, instead of, like, I found with my mom, it's all about language. So it's like, she's going to go do something relaxing. She's going to go do one of her hobbies because it's good for X, or it's good for Y, or it's good for Z. And instead of it being this, like, submissive, like, oh, sorry, y'all, I need to take time off, be proud of it, because in those activities is tons of benefit. And my mom has had this real shift where she's not feeling guilty. She's going out to the garden, she's going out to the flowers, she's going to a yoga class to help her be more understanding of, like, my father, who, they have plenty of funny quirks between them, but she's become more compassionate, more understanding. And likewise my father, because they've shifted from time off being this guilty thing to being a proud thing. And I think that's a very easy lower level tweak that you can start doing. And it's simply just by changing up your phrasing and wording.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Me and my husband and I, that's something that we've been working on over the last 5 years. And especially in this last year or two, we're trying to shift that from letting one another know when, because we get to survival mode, and like the cue, like the, even though we don't really know it, it's a thing. It's like, I'm going to snap. I need a minute. Like, I need this. And so, we have young kids. We have, a quote unquote busy. I actually like the phrase active. You had mentioned that earlier. That feels a
Nice.
lot better to me. We have an active lifestyle. And so our goal, our mission is to start to take that rest time before hitting that wall. And it's not easy, just like anything else. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes that awareness, right? Like, when is my shift happening from my cups being, filled to, okay, now I'm running on E, and kind of at the, the quarter tank mark, versus completely running out of gas and then saying, like, I need time off. And I feel like that's something that many married couples can probably relate to, especially some of the ones that I know that I've coached. They they feel guilty because then their husband doesn't take time for himself, or vice versa. You know, their husband will go out for the weekend and go golfing and have some beers with the boys, but then the wife won't ask for what she needs. So I think it's important to have your voice here, but then also come at it, you know, that cool, calm, and collected, kind of like what you guys are doing with your team. Does that make sense?
Totally, absolutely. I think also what you mentioned, it's very important, really, the self-awareness, and that's really difficult. It's not
Mm-hmm.
an easy thing to even notice that you need the time off, especially because we've been told for, well, centuries now, pretty much, that we should be working hard and we should feel the guilt for not working hard. So we often don't even pause and question, hey, should we really be working hard right now? Is that the wrong thing to do? Is that what we need? So it's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg problem in a way. You should take
Yeah.
time off just to reflect on, hey, what's actually wrong and what do I need? But that's really one of the most valuable, most easy things people can do. Just take 5 minutes out of the day and ask yourself, hey, do I need some more time off? And reflect on what's not working.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot
And
of humans can base their self-worth on productivity,
Totally.
versus what feels good and what's going to help you mentally, physically benefit in the long run. So what
Yeah.
and what were you going to say, John? Sorry.
oh, I was just going to add to that. You know, I hope listeners check out our book whenever they feel called to it. But there's another book that I would highly recommend heading to your library. It's a book by Bronnie Ware. I think she lives in New Zealand, and it's called The Five Regrets of the Dying. And it is a
Mm.
powerful, dense book. And just know that one of the five, she spent decades helping thousands of people pass into the other realm in palliative care. And one of the top five regrets is that they wish they wouldn't have worked so hard.
I've heard
And
that
for me,
before.
yeah, and for me, if I'm like, well, there's thousands of deaths, like end of life pieces of knowledge, if that's a pattern, I'm gonna like listen to that. And it's always been that simple for me. And then it's a matter of figuring out your own language, your own self-awareness, or to Max's point, self-reflection. And then I'll I'll add, for example, my one of my ways to go about it is inspired by my grandfather, who was a hardworking person for sure, a farmer, rancher, and a businessman. And his friends used to joke with him. And now I really appreciate this, and I'm trying to use this as much as I can in my business in my business experience. His friends used to give him a hard time because he'd go fishing, I think, every Tuesday or Thursday, and some of his friends would give him a hard time. You know, they're like, "Man, aren't your freezers gonna run out of space? You know, you go fishing all the damn time." And he's like, "Yeah, sometimes I go fishing for fish," but he goes, "Most of the time when I'm out there, I'm fishing for epiphanies." And that summarizes intentional time off for me.
Mhm.
So because whether I'm going to go practice a sport, I'm going to go out fishing myself, or hiking, riding a horse, or just in the middle of the day cooking myself a nice meal instead of eating fast food, all those moments, yes, they provide me some exhale, some decompression, but also that's when I get my ideas. That's when like my ahas happen, where I may get the breakthrough for the project that'll make everything else obsolete. So in a way, it's like the most meaningful work I actually do. It's a relaxing kind of effort. So for those listeners out there that like fishing or hunting or farming, and all those moments, you can use that phrase. So you can tell your team or your partner that you're out there fishing and harvesting good ideas.
I
Totally.
love that.
And I think it's so wrong, this kind of idea that time off and productivity are the opposite. It's really gonna be like a thing. Like, you're gonna take time off to be more productive, because busy work and productivity are not the same at all. Like,
Mm-mm.
think about the days you're the most busy. In the evening, if you look back at them, are those the days you feel the most accomplished and like you actually got stuff done? Very, very rarely. Like for me as well, like I find my best ideas when I'm out hiking, or also, like you said, in nature. That's really where I get the really good inspirations, and it's really the incubation time. It's really, as John said, fishing for epiphanies.
Yep, I can completely agree with that. Anytime that I feel frazzled or frustrated, or like I've hit a roadblock, I just say to myself, it's time to unplug. I'm going to completely shift gears and go do something to take my mind off of things. And 9 out of 10 times, if I go outside and just breathe, I like how you guys are always putting emphasis on the exhale, because really it is that decompression moment, and you're just releasing everything that you've been releasing, all the pressure that you've been putting on yourself. And then you are open and ready to receive those downloads, and you can see clearly, versus having that busy, chaotic mind. And again, I'm a very visual learner. So when I think of like busy, chaotic mind, I think of like thunderstorms, right? There's like a lot going on. There's a lot of noise. There's clouds, there's rain, there's thunder and lightning. But when you can kind of like calm and quiet that mind, it's like you're walking outside and the sun is shining and you're like absorbing that beam, that energy. And you're like, oh yes, I know what I need to do.
That's a beautiful, I mean, I feel like we're at like at least 20 amazing analogies at this point in this episode.
This is how
we
my
should get an
brain
award.
works.
No, it's beautiful. It reminds me of John Donahue's work. He's a great author. Check his stuff out. But he talks about mindfulness and spirituality through that analogy. He calls it your internal landscape. And simply just observe your internal landscape. Some days it is chaotic, middle of a Manhattan rainstorm, hailstorm inside, and that's going to happen in life. But
yes,
investing in your ability to transition it to a beautiful spring day or a fall day, like we all know those internal landscape moments that we desire, and we have the ability. It's an amazing part about being human. We have the ability to quickly let go of that chaotic landscape and shift it to something more beautiful. And to your points of amazing weather, what does amazing weather do? It bears beautiful fruit. And
absolutely.
that's humanity's greatest gift throughout history. It isn't us being machines, it's us being human and asking ourselves, what else? What could be better? And I think about, especially right now in the climate of a global pandemic, it's really shining a light on what matters and what was sustainable, what was human, what was not. And at the end of the book, in the future of work, we have this really, some of my friends may consider provocative, but Max and I feel damn confident in this message that the things you consider your time off, these human things, that is the skills of tomorrow as more and more software and machines take over. And I think about what most people would consider their extracurricular, which I think is unfortunate we call it that, or in a more positive connotation, volunteer work. When we're mentoring kids, when we're taking care of the elders, when we're planting trees, these things that we consider volunteerism, which is beautiful. I think some of the most beautiful parts of humanity can be found there. For us, we're just like, why are we calling it volunteer? Like, that's the type of work humans were made to do.
To interject here, I am so passionate about this quote unquote volunteerism and really taking care of those who are in need and having that ability. But you're right, it goes back to like filling your cup and being a creative so that you have the energy to do those things. But I am so passionate about that. I'm just sitting here like, yes. So sorry, I just had to say that. Keep going.
That's awesome.
I think you're passionately connected to it. We all are, and we all have our quote volunteer opportunities. I mean, even on all of our LinkedIn's, there's a section for volunteerism, and I'm like, okay, good. That's an early signal, but that's a breadcrumb compared to the bread loaf that I think humanity has in front of them. It's like what we consider volunteerism, which is, again, somehow we're supposed to find and found time on top of a busy machine-like schedule, whereas like, hey, what's possible for the earth if that becomes our work?
Yes. No. I'm really curious, if you say you're so excited about volunteerism, is there anything in particular that really, really excites you?
Oh, anything to preserve nature really excites me. So I'm always, if I'm unable to volunteer time, I like to, monetarily help, but I also teach therapeutic horseback riding. So how to use like equine therapy, teaching individuals' disabilities, how to ride horses, how to connect with horses, build confidence, build core muscle strength, things like this. And
Mm.
it is something that I am so passionate about. I feel that people with disabilities, I don't even like saying that, I hate putting labels on people, but I understand that in order for people to grasp the concept that we have to use labels, to me, people are people. But they
Mhm.
aren't treated like people. And
Mm.
so helping them feel as quote unquote normal and as confident as humanly possible. But these programs and things do not exist without volunteers, without people who are equally as passionate as with helping others. And you can't give from an empty cup. So creating the space for time off so that you can have these creative outlets, you have the energy and the means to give back to others is so important. And it's not a badge of honor. Like I don't ever recommend anybody volunteering out of guilt or out of the feeling they need to or they have
To
to,
put it on
or
LinkedIn.
yeah, exactly. Like never give from a place of I have to. Give from a place of I want to.
Mm.
And again, like these programs, these nonprofits, things like this do not exist without the help of volunteers. So I'm just
Yeah.
very passionate about volunteerism and going and speaking at elderly homes or helping people plant trees, or we have, local things like the Habitat for Humanity where they help like build houses for people, or Camp High Hopes where they help people with individual or with disabilities with these recreational activities. So I could go on and on and on about this stuff. So I just love that you kind of touched base on that. It just kind of lights me up that there's other people out there
Mm.
kind of advocating for that too.
No, that's really wonderful. And I think it again comes back to the idea of good time off really fills your life with meaning. Like the way you talk about this, it sounds like this is extremely meaningful to you. And it would really be wonderful if more people can find something that's so meaningful to them. But they're not going to
Hmm.
find it if they're stressed out and tired in the evening. They don't have the energy to then go out and volunteer as well. So really, hopefully, if more leaders change their minds and if more people in general change their mind, if culture changes, more and more people can really engage in that kind of volunteerism, really help other people, but also fill their own life with that kind of meaning.
So I have a question for you guys. And this is something that I have kind of been dabbling in, and this is the quote unquote 9 to 5 um, work week. I find that, well, one, that's bullshit. When I worked a 9 to 5, it was like a 7 to 7. Basically, it was like a 24-hour job. It was awful. But now I find that I only like work like in my business or on like things that would be labeled as work for maybe 5 hours a day. And I am way more productive than I ever have been in my life, which creates the space to do these things about like riding horses and hanging out with the chickens and my family and the garden and the volunteering and things like that. What is your guys' take? And I know not everybody can avoid the 9 to 5, but what is your take on productivity and time off if you are kind of stuck in that corporate world?
I totally agree with your findings. For me as well, if have the flexibility to really structure my day the way I want, I also only end up working, say, yeah, 4 hours is actually the optimal spot for me. But I get so much stuff done in those 4 hours,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel really great at the end of it. So I realized pretty early that 9 to 5, or as you said, the 7 to 7 is not really the way for me. But on the other hand, I also know a lot of people who do like that kind of structure, who really do want, okay, I want to go to the office at that time. I want to do my work at the office and then I go home. And when I'm home, I'm home. I think that also works for a lot of people. So again, it's not like time off is quite personal, but I
Mm-hmm.
think also the idea of the rest ethic really comes in there. Like so many people now in this time in particular find themselves suddenly working from home without all those constraints. But
Mm-hmm.
it's actually not that easy. That's probably what a lot of people are realizing right now. Like if you don't have the right kind of rest ethic, you probably end up going in either of the two extremes. Either you're not doing anything, or you're completely working yourself to death because there's just, well, no boundaries. Again, it comes back to the boundaries. So I think it takes quite a bit of practice actually to set these boundaries for yourself. But it's really little steps all of us can take, these kind of little micro steps towards building this better rest staffing and building more time off into our routine. And I think then if people actually manage to do that, I totally agree with you. 4 hours are really all it needs to do amazing work. And often putting in more work is actually just going to be detrimental.
Yeah. And I bring it back to, well, it applies to this great question of yours, Sasha, but also I think it's the greatest challenge of modern times today. And that is, I actually believe yes, we have things like a climate challenge, we have things like public health challenges, equality challenges, but to me that those are all underneath an umbrella of a leadership dilemma.
Yes.
We have leaders for a reason. And when I think about the profiles we have throughout the book, what you get is examples of leaders that prioritized human dignity above all else. And so for the person, I mean, I know people that literally are trapped. It's not that, like, they could probably have groundbreaking work if they just work 2 hours a day, but they're being forced into a leader's perspective of human beings or machines. I'm going to treat them like machines. And that's a byproduct of certain eras throughout history where work was like the core of identity. And we obviously, given our book, is we don't believe in that. There's so many other parts that make up your identity. Work can be one component of that for sure. But if it becomes the sole definition, then yeah, I mean, there is no escaping. And so you'll have to just leave the grasp of that leader, or lack of leadership as I see it. And so why we put the book together is we wanted to show, here is this array, this collection of leaders, both in ancient times and now modern times, that are prioritizing human dignity, making sure people can define their own best way of work. And I really think that, I mean, the days where it was hard to write, that's how I got motivation, was that I'm writing this book to eventually get into some leaders' hands to make them go, oh shit, like I'm totally still subscribed to an ideal of philosophy from decades ago when human beings were supposed to be cogs in a wheel of a factory. It's 2020. We're no longer in that world. And in fact, a lot of people don't know this story, that one of the last great leaders, global leaders, to rethink leisure and work was Henry Ford. And Henry Ford we have the 9 to 5 basically thanks to Henry
because
Ford.
of him. Yes.
Yeah. And he was like, wait, people are less safe and we're seeing mistakes. So what happens if we cut down? And then he went on to write, oh, I can imagine decades from now, we're only working 4 hours a day or less. And look, it's 2020 and we're basically still rocking Henry Ford's model.
Well, the thing is, it's actually worse. If you look at the statistics, we have gone back to early 20th century standards even before Henry Ford introduced that. And it gets even worse because Ford introduced these things because he saw it for factory workers. They work more effectively in their manual labor. They make fewer mistakes. They get their shit done better if they work only 8 hours a day. But now our knowledge workers work 10, 12 hours a day. And for them, it's even worse. Like, this 8-hour workday was made for physical labor. Knowledge work, you burn out, you lose your energy much, much quicker than 8 hours. So it's really ridiculous what we're doing right now.
It's so interesting that you guys say this. I talk about this all the time, and how the 9 to 5 was created based on manual labor, and how much energy you can exert before you become exhausted and need to take time off. And yes, it has, I believe, gotten worse over the years, because even my husband works in a facility where they still do shift work. And there's plenty of plants and packing plants around here. I even come from corporate manufacturing, and an 8-hour workday is far and few. They do not, from what I have seen, that is not the norm. That is not common. It's usually, hey, we'll schedule you for 8 hours, but plan on being here 10 or 12. And they will do that day in and day out. And I know that there is some state and federal regulations on how many consecutive days you can work before forcing them to take a day off. But again, it goes back to people basing their worth on productivity, and same with leaders. We have to do more, and it's always the concept of do more, do more, do more. But then we are burning out at exceedingly rates, and then we have the health problems, the public health problems. You have people who are chronically stressed and overwhelmed, and they actually have a diagnosis of burnout now, I've heard. Which is something that's never happened before. You have people who are being diagnosed with anxiety, and just all of these chronic illnesses that I believe stem from being overworked and overproducing and not taking the adequate amount of time to rest and rejuvenate your mind, body, soul. Basically, you don't have time to eat the healthy meals. You don't have time to have the adequate, people pride themselves on how little of sleep they can get. I see it all the time. They're like, oh, and I do it with my husband too, because we have 2 small kids. And I was like, oh, who got less sleep last night? Like, who was up every hour, but it's kind of a joke. We try our best to get 8 hours of sleep, and hell, all 4 naps. If I can squeeze in a half hour, an hour long nap in the afternoon, I am here for it. But that's not the norm.
It's not. I think about, we talked about through this episode, in those moments of space, of exhale, of being restful, of being calm, we are actually beyond survival mode, and we reach thrival mode. Yes. And we start asking the big questions. And if you look at the leaps throughout humanity's short little history on this small little pale blue dot, the leaps we've had came from people, cultures that had a moment to even reflect on how could it be better? This isn't sustainable. Let's go to the next level. And I don't know about y'all too, but this global pandemic for me has showed me that we need big ideas. I mean, not just a 10% improvement ideas, like complete culture shifting ideas. And any great leader that's now passed on to the other realms, or however you look at death, like, they built the stepping stones for us to continue to think big. Aristotle's era of people coming up with philosophy and science as we know it, like, that was a long time ago. And we need to leapfrog from what they said. The founding fathers of the United States, they were like, oh, by the way, everyone, every 7 years or so, y'all should rethink this, right? It's like, we are meant to rethink, reassess, and unless you unplug, I like your use of that word, unless you unplug and look at it from an objective point of view, you can't go to those new exponential levels of growth. And so I hope that listeners are thinking what I'm thinking. And it's like, whoa, this global pandemic has definitely made me assess who's our leaders, what kind of future are they thinking about, and as a human race, what are we going to create for our grandchildren and generations to come?
It's really great, the thing you bring up. Bertrand Russell at the beginning of the 20th century really summed that up extremely well. He really believed that, and he said it explicitly, all of civilization and all of culture was built by the leisure class, and that leisure class was supported by the majority of the people who were in the working class. But we're now at a point in time where, through advanced technology like AI, this leisure class can be massively expanded, so more people can really think big ideas and spend their time on culture and all these kind of things. So yeah, we're really at a wonderful point in time if we just take the opportunity and not ruin it.
I love that. I feel like I could talk to you guys for hours about these topics. I'm like, this is gold. This is fire. I love this stuff. More people need to absorb this. And again, going back to what works for some may not work for others. Take the nuggets that work for you and toss the rest. It's different for everybody, but there's so much gold in this episode. So to kind of land this plane, the last two things that I would like to ask you guys is, what is the one takeaway you want to leave listeners with? And then how can we find more, and where can we get your book?
I can start with a takeaway. It's very, very difficult to summarize the whole thing in just a few words, but I'd say do one thing right now. Take a pause and ask yourself, when am I just being busy, and when am I actually doing something meaningful and productive? Because those things are not exactly the same thing. And a lot of the times they're very, very different things. So just take 5 minutes and ask yourself, is my hard work actually working? I think that's a very, very good starting point. John, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say no work, no project, no task is more important than a relationship. And right now, if you are going to check a text message over asking a loved one how they're doing, and like really asking them that, or go fishing with a grandparent, or whatever relationship opportunity you have in front of you, if you have to ask yourself, do I work on this thing, or do I invest in this relationship? Invest in the relationship. And hopefully the book will remind you of that. Read The 5 Regrets of the Dying. It will for sure remind you of that. But this pandemic has just made me realize all I have is relationships. That's it. The work, the projects, that will come in waves. But those relationships are fleeting. And if you don't take the opportunity, you'll have to one day reflect on that missed opportunity.
Well said, John. And yeah, I guess people can find the book anywhere. Well, definitely Amazon and all the other big ones, but hopefully also they should be able to order it from their local bookstores. It's Time Off, a practical guide to building your rest ethic and finding success without the stress. And we're just super excited to get it into people's hands. And also, we're really excited to hear people's stories of how they found success in their own way through practicing time off.
I love that. I will be sure to put all of your guys' links in the show notes for people to find you and get your book. So I appreciate you guys so much for hopping on here. I truly loved this conversation. I love hearing other people's perspectives on really taking the time off to allow yourself to be creative and find what brings you joy and focus on more of those things in life.
And Sasha, you should definitely teach a course online on the art of analogy. You got a real gift.
I have heard that time and time again. People say, you have a way of painting pictures in my mind, and it's a gift.
Good. Yeah. Thank you for your time and wonderful question.
Yeah, thanks for having us. That was a really nice conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Sasha Davis podcast. It would mean so much to me if you could take 3 seconds out of your day and leave me an honest review on your podcast app, or take a quick screenshot and share to your social media and tag a friend, letting us know what you enjoyed most about this episode. And as always, for free resources and ways to work with me, head on over to my website, sashadavis.com, or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram at sasha.davis. And I hope you guys have a kick-ass day.